Hello, everybody. My name is Olivia DeLeon. I am the Assistant Director of Wellness, and I'd like to introduce Desiree. Oh, actually, Desiree, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Desiree Browning, and I am the counselor here at the ATSU Mesa campus. Super excited to be here with you today.
Great. Today, we're going to be talking about healthy relationships. So when we think about healthy relationships, I'm sure we kind of might hyper-focus on the romantic relationships, but there are many types of relationships. We have acquaintances, so those people we are not too familiar with, friends, family, romantic partners, professional relationships, kind of like the relationships we're creating in the disciplines that we're majoring, right? Positive relationships lead to social integration, and the outcome that we all are hoping for is a positive one. We want positive experiences, we want positive work environments, positive relationships with our romantic partners, within our family, and in our social groups as well. So when we're looking at relationships, I feel like one thing that's important to focus on, and we've been hearing a lot in social media, is green flags, like the green flag, red flags of what healthy relationships or unhealthy relationships are made of. So when we look at green flags, we're looking at qualities in a person that are desirable, right? Are they healthy? Like, are they capable of maintaining a healthy relationship? Are they mature enough to hold conversations, especially the difficult ones that come in healthy relationships? Generally desirable traits that can indicate what the outcome may be in the future. So again, let's go a little bit further into this. What are some other green flags? We have someone who listens, not just listens, but I feel like processes those needs and concerns that you have in a relationship. You can say like, hey, I don't like when you leave the toilet seat up, but is that person listening to you? Like, they may say, okay, I understand you don't like it when I leave the toilet seat up, but is there any follow through on that? Is there a mutual understanding to put it down every time? Someone you're comfortable talking about your feelings with. You know that coming to this person, you're not going to feel judged, or that what you say may be used against you later. Someone who honors your boundaries. And I feel like this is so important, because you want someone, when you tell them, hey, this is my boundary, please respect my bubble, and they don't come and keep trying to pop your bubble. Someone who is comfortable with the pace that you both are mutually proceeding with in your relationship. If something feels rushed, they respect your boundaries to pull things back a little bit. Someone willingness to apologize. I'm sorry I disrespected your boundaries, or all of these things that we hope to get out of a healthy relationship are the green flags that we're looking at. So do you feel supported in your personal growth? A lot of you in these programs, these very vigorous programs, I feel like you may look for, you're looking for somebody to support you on your journey, or maybe you have somebody who's by your side, and those are all green flags, right? Someone who you are comfortable with saying, I want to go into a doctoral program, even though I'm going to spend all my nights and weekends in this program, and, kind of giving my life to it. And they're willing to accept that, right? They're honoring those boundaries. They're growing with you, providing, they're that sense of stability that you were looking for. And then we'll go into red flags here in a bit with Desiree, but again, just going over this list, some of the green flags. One major thing that comes from a healthy relationship and looking at those green flags, I think a common underlying understanding is communication. We want someone who is honest and thoughtful in their communication with us. How can we be good communicators? I feel like that starts a lot with I feel statements. I feel overwhelmed. I feel like we're rushing. All of those I feels, rather than, and let's flip to the opposite of that, you statements, like you are rushing me. Or what if this person doesn't feel like they're rushing you? I feel rushed. And really owning those feelings that you're having is great for communication. Separating the issue from the person, it's not you versus this person, it's both of you versus this issue, right? And then actively listening to what the other person's trying to convey, actively listening, processing, and trying to come to a place of understanding. You may not understand where a person is coming from, but trying to communicate and compromise to find solutions to the problems is going to be huge. Treating a discussion, treating a situation as a discussion as opposed to an argument, not coming from a place of defensiveness. I feel like that is huge. Communication is going to take practice. This list here is just a synopsis of what great communication is, but with practice, you will be able to achieve this. And communication is so important, especially when you are in a field where you got to communicate what your patient's needs are, right? You have a patient who comes in and says, I feel unwell. Okay, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Good job on the I feel statement, good job in saying I feel unwell, but can we dig a little bit deeper than that? It's going to be a two-way street, trying to use those open-ended questions as opposed to those yes or no questions, and making sure that you get the full understanding. A patient may come in and say, I feel unwell, and you think, okay, maybe you need help medically, but then maybe they just, maybe they need mental health. Maybe they need a combination of like, I feel unwell because my stomach is upset. Well, why is your stomach upset? Maybe I need to talk to somebody, and really reaching out and making those connections and finding what a person's needs are, I think is huge. With that, boundaries. I feel like a lot of times when we look at boundaries, we wonder like, okay, well, the main boundary we understand is, we should be aware of physical boundaries, respect my bubble, I respect yours, sexual boundaries, consent, which we're going to get to here in a minute, but we also have intellectual boundaries. I feel like this a lot of times comes to those people who may be knowledgeable in a certain area, but may not be in a place to fully share all the time, right? You may be overwhelmed and always sharing your stories or having to input or, always being the person who understands certain concepts of a subject. We have emotional boundaries, right? We want to respect those financial boundaries. And that can go both ways, someone who's always wanting to pay, but someone who feels uncomfortable that the other person's always footing the bill could be a financial boundary. Your boss asking you for to hold money, that is a boundary you may not feel comfortable crossing. All of these boundaries I feel like are important to know for yourself and also for the other person that you are interacting with. Right now, I'd like to pause and ask you a rhetorical question. How do you establish healthy boundaries? I know that you can't communicate with me in this video, but just thinking about it, what are those boundaries that you have set for yourself? Have you maybe slipped a little bit in certain boundaries that you hope and wish that you would have maintained? What are those, and what does it feel like knowing that those boundaries are there and that people are respecting them? And on the flip side, do you have any boundaries that you want to reestablish or reassess? Because boundaries change. Setting boundaries. So how do you do this? Again, it's that self-reflection we're just doing. Starting small. You're not going to go from 0 to 100. You're not going to go from a couch to a half marathon overnight. The same with boundaries. If you want to, you can start small at a pace that's comfortable to you. Set boundaries early with new people that you come into contact with, and be consistent with those boundaries. Be aware of your use in social media. I feel like one thing I'd always like to talk about when we're talking about physical boundaries here is checking those locations, right? I think TikTok had an update that said, oh, well, you can see who viewed your profile, just like they can see that you viewed their profile, right? So maybe watching those boundaries that you set on social media. Maybe you want to set a limit to time you want to spend on social media. All of those things, checking, where the geotag is on the picture that you just sent. All of these are setting boundaries and being aware of it. Communication is critical when it comes to boundary setting, because maybe at one point you were comfortable sharing your physical location with somebody and now you revoke it. And I don't know why iPhone does it, but it says so-and-so is no longer sharing their location with you. And that's okay, through communication, saying, I want a little bit more privacy. I don't feel like it's beneficial for you to have my location at this time. Those are all ways to set boundaries with others. And then being your biggest champion, right? You want to feel comfortable in what you do and all of those areas that you're going to have to set boundaries in, and that you want someone to understand where you're coming from. Going with your gut instinct, sometimes that includes setting boundaries, reestablishing boundaries, reassessing boundaries. All are great things. And then now we're going to get into the red flags. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Desiree. Thank you all so much for your time.
So with our red flags, this really refers to an early sign of an unhealthy relationship or a problematic partner. These are the things that maybe we're a little bit more cautious about, something that maybe gives us more of a pause and causes us to really consider, is this a good thing? How do I feel about this? Do I progress moving forward? So with some of these red flags, some of those examples include, next slide. Some of those examples include a lack of communication. Is your partner stonewalling you and just completely like not talking to you whatsoever? Maybe you got into an argument with a friend and they decide to just ghost you for like 5 days because they're mad at you. It also might look like somebody being unpredictable in your life. Now, there is a difference if your partner, your friend, a family member, they like to surprise you and you enjoy surprises, that can be a good thing. If somebody is like, hey, I really saw something at the store today, it made me think of you, I thought you would like this chocolate bar, that can be a really nice thing. Unpredictable is more of not being able to predict their behavior overall. You know, if you talk to someone, are they going to be reliable? Are they going to treat you kindly? Or do you feel like you have to walk on eggshells with that person? It also looks like having the lack of trust or someone being untrustworthy. If somebody tells you something, can you trust in what they're going to say? Or can you trust them to keep in confidence what you've told them? It can also look like controlling behavior. Is your partner, is your friend, are they telling you things that you can and can't do? Are they saying, hey, no, you can't hang out with your friends because I want to have all of your time because it's important? That might be a sign of one of those red flags where maybe we just pause. We stop for a minute and we take a second. It could also look like a non-resolution of past relationships, which, you know, most of us have been in previous relationships before, which is fine. That's a good thing. But what it looks like is if your partner is saying, hey, you're always so-and-so, or my ex did so-and-so, or you're not going to be the same as so-and-so, that can be really hurtful for you. And of course, another big red flag is abusive behavior. You know, we'll get a lot more into that as we go on. It could also look like consistency. Again, this goes into trust and trustworthiness. Gaslighting as well, that's a term that's been used a lot lately. So making sure that you actually know what the definition of gaslighting is so that you can recognize it. And it can look like if you're telling your partner or friend, like, hey, this is really bothering me, like, I didn't like the way this felt, and then being told, oh, well, you're making that up. Oh, you're blowing it out of proportion. It didn't happen like that. It also looks like a lack of respect for boundaries, which Olivia explained so greatly earlier what boundaries look like. And it can also look like manipulation as well. And again, we were talking about all sorts of relationships. So not just like a romantic partner, but also a friend, an acquaintance, or a family member. So another thing as well that we're going to talk about is going to be consent. Now, I fully believe that consent should be enthusiastic, it should be affirmative, and it also should be voluntary and mutually understandable. And it's for all parties involved to engage in a specific sexual act or any act at a specific time, making sure that you get consent for all things with somebody. You know, for me, I'm a hugger. And so I always have to ask people like, hey, is it okay if I give you a hug? Is that okay? Respecting that physical boundary that they may have with themselves. So that way I'm not overstepping. And that way I get consent from them as well. That way it's affirmative, it's voluntary, and it's mutually understandable to all parties involved. With consent, so what that can look like is it can be withdrawn at any time. It can, as long as it's clearly communicated, making sure that you have, next slide, please. Making sure that you can take it back at any point. Like I said, consent is supposed to be voluntary. So you can also voluntarily remove that consent at any time. It also cannot be coerced or compelled by force, threat, deception, or intimidation. This is, again, another voluntary thing, and it is also like that enthusiastic piece. It also cannot be given by someone who's incapacitated. If you yourself or a friend, a family member, whoever is not potentially in that right state of mind, they can't really consent because they may not fully understand, or you may not fully understand what is being asked of you in that situation. Consent is really about communication and respect for both parties involved, or as many parties involved as there are. And it also cannot be assumed based on silence. Just because you don't say no or somebody doesn't say no doesn't mean it's a yes. The absence of no and the absence of stop does not mean that consent has been given. Consent is also not based on the existence of a prior or current relationship or prior sexual activity. Just because you're dating someone or you're really close with someone doesn't mean that you have just consent to them all the time. That consent can be withdrawn. That consent can change. It can depend on the moment or even the day. So making sure that you're checking in with the people around you to make sure that that consent has been willingly given before engaging in an activity with them. Dating violence is another form as well. So intimate partner violence is domestic violence by a current or former spouse or partner in an intimate relationship against the other spouse or partner. And it can actually take on quite a few different number of forms. One is physical. So the physical abuse, it may show up as bruising, scratches, it shows up as hitting your partner. Just because it doesn't leave a mark doesn't mean it's not abuse. And so being able to keep that in mind as well. Can look like verbal. Is your partner, your friend, your family member intimidating you? Are they belittling you in front of others? Are they gaslighting you? It can look like an emotional form of abuse as well. And it can also look like economic. Is somebody withholding funds, or are they having you pay for all those things? Oftentimes it can be hard if people are in a situation like this because maybe their partner controls all of their funds. And so they're not able to just withdraw money to leave the situation. And it's been found that it takes on average about 7 times of attempting to leave before someone is actually able to leave an abusive relationship or an abusive situation, just because it takes a lot of preparation to do that. And part of that is economic. And it can also look like sexual abuse as well. It can look like your partner or a friend forcing certain things on you that you didn't consent to, things that you didn't readily agree to with that person. So the next topic we're going to cover is domestic violence. And so these warning signs don't always appear overnight, and they actually may emerge and intensify as the relationship grows. You know, maybe it starts off really small, like your partner putting you down, or it may look like your friend hitting you and, you know, realizing like, oh my gosh, I'll never do this again. But it sometimes can start small, it can actually continue. Maybe it does happen again. Maybe your partner continues to put you down. One feature shared by most abusive relationships is that the abusive partner tries to establish or gain power and control through many different methods at different moments. And those are some of the things we talked about in terms of the internal, personal, intimate partner violence, is those different forms of abuse, like the economic, the physical, the verbal, the emotional, and the sexual abuse as well. So some common signs of abusive behavior: showing extreme jealousy of friends or time spent away from them. You know, if you're going out and you're like, hey, I want to have a great time, I'm going to hang out with the girls this weekend, I'm going to hang out with the fellas, whoever you're hanging out with. And if your partner is saying, no, you can't do that, like, I, forbid it, you're not allowed to. That's the sign. That's one of those red flags that we were talking about earlier. If they're even preventing or discouraging you from spending time with your friends, your family members, or even your peers. It can look like insulting, demeaning, or shaming you, especially in front of others. Oftentimes, abuse may not even always occur behind doors. You may notice some of these signs when you're out with your friends at a party. It also may look like preventing you from making your own decisions, telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing, pressuring you to have sex or perform sexual acts that go beyond your comfort, insulting your parenting, or threatening to harm or take away your children or pets. And it could look like destroying your belongings or your home. Maybe you come back and your room is destroyed, or your favorite plates have all been smashed. It can look like intimidation with weapons, and it can also look like stalking in any capacity, including social media. So making sure that you're very careful about who you're sharing your information with at any given time. An important reminder about abuse is that not all abuse is physical. Like we said earlier, just because it doesn't leave a mark doesn't mean it's not abuse. So although not all abuse is physical, abuse is abuse. And so it's important to recognize these signs because maybe you see it in your own relationships with somebody around you, or maybe you see it in your friends' relationships as well. And maybe it's something that you're able to talk with them about. Now, there is typically an abuse cycle. It typically starts off with being calm. The relationship is calm. Things are peaceful. It's a honeymoon phase. And then there's that tension building. Something seems a little off. You're a little tense. There's maybe a lack of communication, and there's a little sense of fear that goes on. And then there's the big incident. It could be verbal, emotional, or physical abuse that occurs. And afterwards, there's that reconciliation. The abuser apologizes and it gives excuses, maybe blames the victim, makes it feel like it's your fault, and it denies that the abuse occurred. No, that didn't happen, or oh, this will never happen again, or, I'm sorry, but. And then it goes back into calm. Things are peaceful. But it's this cycle that keeps happening and keeps running in circles. And so maybe you find yourself in this cycle. Maybe you see your friends in this cycle. And so being able to point those out and go, oh, and maybe taking a step back, recognizing those red flags we talked about, and reaching out for help if that help is needed. And speaking of help, we do have some great resources. So we have the National Domestic Violence Hotline listed on here, and they also have live chats. They also have texting and calling. And when you go onto their website, they have all of these ways that, if your partner comes up from behind you, there's an easy escape button on the website that makes it look like something else or completely exits you from the website. So it's a really secure website, and they want to make sure that you feel safe to access that. If you're in Arizona, we also have the shelter line for the Maricopa County. And we also have the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, multiple numbers that are listed on there. And then there's also the Sexual Assault Hotline. If you're listening to this in Missouri or literally any other state, there are also domestic violence shelters that are in other states as well that have those resources for you. So we do want to stress that you're not alone in this. We wanted to talk about healthy relationships, and part of that is covering domestic violence and intimate partner violence as well. If you do need assistance at any time, please make sure that you're reaching out to your local resources, and also know that you can reach out to the university as well, to the resources that are provided by the school. So we want to thank you for your time. And Olivia, any last words?
I think that was great, Desiree. Thank you so much. It really does take all of us to end domestic violence. If you feel like you listening to this, it resonates not for yourself, but for like a friend or family member, we encourage you to start those difficult conversations, making sure that you take time in a private space where you have plenty of time to discuss a little bit further. You definitely don't want to drop something like this and just in passing of like, hey, I saw this healthy relationships presentation. I feel like you'd benefit from it. I feel like making sure that you're able to talk with somebody and share what you can. These conversations are very difficult to bridge, but you can do hard things, as we always tell you all. So I appreciate all of you for listening today. And I believe that is everything we have to share today. So thank you so much, Desiree. This was awesome.
Thank you.